Great. Okay, welcome, Rob. Thank you so much for being the final contributor for the day and wrapping up this whole piece. And I know your fascination and your concept you'd like to explore is how we create communities of impact. And before we dive into the gist of all that, we've just had, like, what is it, 12 great conversations with coaches who are making a big social impact in different ways. And I'm curious, what do you feel is at the heart of all of this that gets them out of bed to do that kind of work?
I guess it's that desire to create change, but to create change with something that has a burning desire for them, or a passion for them, or an excitement for them that goes beyond just the one-to-one working. It's almost often with social impact coaching projects, they often go beyond a coach's niche. So it's not just, I work with young people, so I do something with young people. It tends to really tap into something that's really important for them, often an injustice that they're seeing, and they go, right, how do I answer that call with the skills that I have and with the connections that I have?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's what I'm feeling too, as I've been having these conversations, is this kind of almost like a burning desire to make a difference somehow through the communities they're part of and through their own work. So we've talked about this, the community word. Let's go into it. What does that mean to you when you talk about communities of impact?
Yeah, so I think there's really two communities when we think about communities of impact. There's the community of coaches, and then there's the community that they're working with. And when you're creating these sorts of projects, you need to think about both of those to make sure that you're bringing the right value sets together to deliver that impact work, and bringing the right people together to be part of that. So I think when you look at the community that you want to work with, it's looking at, so what's their challenge, what's their issue, and what's their need, and making sure you have conversations with them about it, and not assuming that because somebody's homeless, their need is to be home. There might be something else that's more important to them that you don't know until you have those conversations. There's doing that research with that community that you want to help. And then the community of coaches, I guess I often think of it as your tribe. Who's your tribe that kind of, when you give that battle cry that you want to go and do some work, are going to go, yeah, I want to come and do that work with you, as opposed to just throwing it out there to the whole world and saying, who wants to join me? Knowing which bit of your coaching community do you want to reach out to, or which network do you want to connect with to pull into that program of work you want to do.
You've mentioned there this idea of actually understanding what that community wants in terms of, let's say, you talked about the homeless analogy, and I guess it's the same for the coaches. What are they looking to get from doing this work? And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about, from what you've seen and the best practices you've seen, when somebody's trying to create a social impact kind of community with a set of coaches, how do they go about meeting the needs of that community, that coaching community?
Well, I think part of it is being really clear about what their requirement to be part of the program is. So, whether that's 14 hours or 14 days, and what level of skill do they need to be at? Because that really helps people to identify and understand, what is it that I'm bringing to this, or what's being called of me that makes this work. And then there's things like, do you need to interview that group to make sure that you're picking the people with the right value set and the right passion set to come and work on those programs, as opposed to just anybody who'll come along, allowing them to take part. Because I think it's really important to have the right people, the right coaches as part of these programs, especially when you're working with the young or the elderly or the vulnerable. What they have the right quality to step into that space.
And what about the flip side then? So looking at the client group, it's interesting because you said, you might talk to a homeless person, they don't want to be homed. They also might not want to be coached.
Yeah.
It's like, that's just taken for granted in a sense that coach is this great thing we can inject into a system. And I wonder how we navigate the assumption that coaching is the right approach, and how do we make sure that it is what's needed?
Yeah. Again, I think this is a research piece. That, a lot of these projects, people have had an idea, they've set it up, and it's been successful. But sometimes these projects aren't successful. Somebody goes, oh, I want to coach this group of people. They set up a project, and then the kind of the clientele or the community go, well, we don't want that. That's not the intervention that we're looking for. And I think where these programs work really well is where there are conversations with people in that community about what coaching might be able to bring about. And somebody goes, yes, that's going to work for us. That's going to work for my community. So I remember the Wilderness Foundation project where coaches worked with young people in outdoor spaces, doing coaching, spending the day together, building fires and doing that sort of thing. There were conversations with that organization before the project was set up that it explores what is this thing called coaching and how might the young people respond to coaching, and will it actually meet a need that they have. So I think it's really key to go, will this thing we do called coaching that we love and we think everybody should be doing and having, but does that group need it or want it or even know what it is?
So there's a sort of an education piece in the first instance, because a lot of organizations won't have an idea what coaching is. So it sounds that there's an education piece. This is what coaching is and what it might do for you. What is it, the change you want to happen, and is there a good fit there?
Yeah, and also, you know, if the program is something where you're outreaching to the public and saying, hey, we have this thing, would you like to get coaching and be part of it? Let's say it's about, you know, people that have been furloughed and going, if you've been furloughed, would you like coaching? To be really clear in the messaging about, well, what is this thing called coaching? And what is it going to do? Or how might it help you? So people joining the program are really clear about what they can expect to get from the coaching.
Let's kind of look at it from a structural perspective. You've kind of given this notion of the two communities, which makes total sense. You've got the community of the ultimate users, and you've got the community of the people who are going to provide coaching. But then you're also going to have the catalyst for this, the person who had the idea, or the people who had the idea and said, wow, we'd love to do this. From what you've seen, what would you say are the sort of the key first steps for somebody who is that catalyst? It's like determined to somehow bring these two communities together. Like, what's that process, do you think?
So I think the first bit is they've got to be passionate about it. I mean, it's got to really fire them up, because often this isn't easy. It can sound like, you know, there's a group of people there that I think coaching would work for. I know some coaches, I'll bring these two things together and make it happen. And what I've seen is that you need tenacity to make this work. You need real desire, and you need to push through it and be motivated. I think some of the key elements that make it work is designing what it looks like. It's spending the time to go, what's this look like that I'm trying to create? Let's mind map it, vision board it, you know, write my strategy document, whatever that might be. So you get really clear on the nuts and bolts of what you want to create, or the impact that you want to explore. And then it's connecting with the right people. So it's not just connecting with coaches, it's connecting with supervisors or mentors or business-minded people to help plug your gaps in the process. Because I think these are like mini businesses that are created to serve something. So you need people around you that understand some of the other processes that you need to think about. And then there's your support network, you know, who's going to keep you going through it when it gets difficult or challenging, or things aren't working, that you can then lean on and go, right, what's my next step? How can you help me to do that? So part of it is always building a team of some shape or form around you to deliver that program. And being really clear about what's the end of the program look like. Not having something that's just ongoing, but going, yeah, how am I going to end this? Is there a time that's going to say this is over, or is it a one-off event that we come together, we do this thing, and then it's over? So, you know, what's the end point for it? And then I think there is the capturing of the data or the information of the ongoing process. How do you store this? Because when you think about how you're going to capture that data, it then helps you think about what you might need to look for. And when you think about what you need to look for, then you can plan that into your process. So I think there's lots of planning that goes into this that sometimes is ad hoc planning. So people kind of cobble it together as they're going through it and they start to notice, oh, we don't have all of these pieces, or we're not collecting that information, so let's go about doing that. But there are others that create these programs that are sort of project managers minded type people. So they're really good at going, right, let me put the whole project together and map that out and then deliver on it.
Yeah, very nice. That makes a lot of sense. You kind of almost got like a chronology and all, a sort of a chronology that's been reverse engineered. So what is it you're trying to get to? And then how do you figure out whether you've got there at the end of it all? It's interesting when you talked about support groups, and there was somebody, various groups you mentioned, I've forgotten what they were, but it occurred to me that you've got these two major communities, but you've also got these kind of satellite communities that you build up as well.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's actually, when we talk about communities of impact, we're talking about multiple communities that are part of the same kind of journey together.
Yeah, I think so. Often when people do social impact work, it's for free. They're volunteering their time, so they can't bring in a consultant that's going to do AdWords for them or build the website for them. So they need to go, right, what's the community that I can pull in around me that can support me to do this? And so often you find that, as you're saying, there are these mini impact projects happening within inside the bigger impact project of somebody that goes, you know, oh, I want to help make a difference. I'm not a coach, but I can build your website, or I can do your marketing, or I can do your t-shirts, or I can make lunch, or whatever that bit of it might be that goes into enabling the project to happen itself.
Yeah. There's something I'm curious about with all this, and I've had this question in my mind for each of the interviews I've done, pretty much in most cases, which is, I guess for me, it's uncomfortable to ask for anything from someone, either for free or in terms of altruism or whatever it might be. And I'm curious, like, your take on how we overcome, because I think a lot of us have this resistance to asking for help. And I wonder, you're talking about lots of communities there and lots of people involved, and how do you overcome that kind of resistance so that you start to really say, actually, I need stuff for free, or I need the support for free, because in most cases, we're not going to have a lot of money to do these kinds of projects.
So I think this really keys into what is the project, who's the project helping, and how it's going to help them. Because if we understand those components, then we're not asking for help for us, but we're asking for help to enable that to take place. And that's a much easier ask. If I'm asking for people to help me to run something, they're going to go, well, should I spend that time with Rob? Should I give that to Rob? Don't know. But if I go, I'm doing this for these people to make that happen, to enable this to take place, can you support that in any way? Then you find people go, well, yeah, I can support it like this. And then you also find they go, oh, and I know this person who can help you with that part. And I know this person that can help you with that part. So that the clarity on what you're trying to achieve is so important to enable you to get past your own kind of, how do I ask people for help? Because you're not asking for it for yourself. It's beyond you.
Yeah, I really like that. It's almost like you're having to, I'm a bit ashamed to say this as I reflect it back to you, but it's almost like you're breaking down the ego that's at the potentially at the heart of this kind of work in the first instance, and actually allowing it to become more about the whole thing and not just like, what difference am I going to make through this?
Yeah, I think that's a really key thing there, because projects that often stumble are ones where there is too much ego involved. So where I'm going, I want to help the world. I want to solve this problem. I want you to help me so I can do it, as opposed to I want you to be part of a system that creates a change. Because people can sense that, they notice that, and they go, well, why am I helping you to do this, as opposed to why am I helping create something? So I think it's really important to get past your own ego. And that's why I think with these projects, it's really important not to get caught in your rescuer to create these projects, because then you've got the whole drama triangle and all those transactional things at play, because it's about you being seen to do something as opposed to the thing being seen.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it in terms of the drama triangle, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I can imagine how you go in as a rescuer and very soon you're persecuting because the clients aren't showing up, or the coaches aren't doing what they said they're going to do, or whatever it might be. Could you kind of expand on that idea?
Yeah. So for me, it's about going, what is it that you want to do? and it may come from you want to help people to do something, but then go beyond the I want to help and go, what's the help that is needed, and how might this project enable that help to appear, or the change to be created. So it stops being about your individual input and becomes about the process or the system that is taking place. Because when it's just about the you, then everything falls back to you. Then if you get a pushback, it's about you. If somebody challenges the work that you're doing, then it's about you. And you get caught in the ego of it. But also, you also start looking for everybody else to rescue and join you in your rescuing and on your crusade, as it were. But also you start identifying the persecutors rather. You start going, well, they're the people that are doing it to us. Aren't they bad? And then it gets into a whole political conversation that can undermine the work that you're trying to do.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about, like, years ago, we were involved in a project with London Early Years Foundation. And of course, we were so, we were kind of so gung-ho about the idea of how we were going to bring coaching to young people going through apprenticeships. And of course, what happened was the young people pretty much en masse didn't turn up to coaching. And there was this sense of like, what's going on here? And all these years later, it kind of feels to me like there's something about how you look at the systemic kind of perspective to this, first and foremost, before you dive into just kind of throwing a piece of coaching intervention in.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I often say to people is, don't just think about throwing money at a project. Think about, how's the project going to go beyond you and beyond the intervention that you do and beyond money, because we can keep throwing money to solve things, and sometimes money's needed. It's a part of the solution, or part of whether we need equipment or food or whatever that piece is. We need funds to make that happen. But how do you then go, how does this go beyond that? How do I create a system, or how do I create an impact that has an impact on a system that can continue beyond me? A little bit like we do with our one-to-one coaching. We go, at some point I'm going to step away as the coach and the coachee in this, and the coach is going to have the coachee is going to have the skills to move forward without me, or the understanding or the realization. And I think you need to think about these projects systemically and sustainably. Otherwise you burn out, you get frustrated. And that's why I think it's also really important to go, when is this going to end? So it's not just this piece of string program that you're working on.
If you could kind of crystallize the role of that catalyst. So there they are, they're right, I want to make this difference. And they have got these coaches and they got these potential users of coaching. How would you crystallize their essential role, would you say, such that it doesn't become about them?
Connecting. I think that their role is about connecting the coaches with the clients, the funders with the system, the external groups with the program. So they become a connector, and they're just going, let's connect people to, and they stop being a doer as well, because often part of the challenge is they're the doer and they run out of steam and energy to do all of the doing. So it's like, how do you connect all these people together to make the thing happen whilst holding the vision of what it is that you want to happen? So you got to connect, you got a whole vision, and you got to sell the vision. And I don't mean sell the vision in, you got to convince people to take part, but they've got to see the impact of your vision and what that's going to do, and the value that's involved in it. So they go, yeah, I want to be part of that. That pulls on my heartstrings, or my values, or my politics. So I want to get involved to make that happen. Or I want to get involved in that because not only do I help somebody else, but it helps me. So there's a win-win within that as well.
Yeah, great. It's interesting you were talking about the selling, and I had a conversation, one of the interviews I had for this summit was with David Frost, and he talked about the idea that quantitative data allows you to know it's working, but qualitative data sells the story of what you're doing. And I really like that distinction. And I wonder, from the work you've seen and the people you've been interviewing, how would you ascertain the importance of measuring impact versus just kind of trusting the process. And what sort of lesson have you taken from that?
If you don't measure, you don't know it's working. If you don't measure, nobody wants to join in. If you don't measure, no one's going to fund you. If you don't measure, you can't do it again because you've got no idea of what's happening. Now with some groups, with some projects, the measure's been that person's got a job, or that person's feeling more calm, or that person's connected with the world once more, and that's the measure. But you've got to name that, and you got to document this stuff. Otherwise, it's just something that happens and that disappears, and there's no tangibility about it. I think the measuring makes it tangible, and it also, when you measure it, it allows you to then go next time to go, right, so what wasn't working last time? What are the numbers that we didn't hit when we did a project for the homeless, and now we're doing a project for victims of I don't know, whatever, victims of crime. You go, right, because we measured it last time, we can look at what were the things that were working and what were important, and so now let's see how we can bring those over into this new project and measure that as well.
Have you seen any particular approaches to measuring that's worked from the interviews you've been doing and from the work you've seen? I'm just thinking in the sense that coaching can often be quite an intangible, not always, but sometimes can be an intangible kind of process and outcome. I'm just wondering what you've seen that looks like it could offer something to somebody doing this.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I've seen. So one is, just doing a happiness measurement. When we started this project, interview everybody that's involved. How happy are you right now? Or how safe do you feel right now? Or how okay do you feel to go out into the world right now? Let's get a number on that. And at the end of the project, ask the same question and get the number. So you can just measure the journey. I think that's the simplest way of doing it. And then you can get really clever and exciting with, creating apps where people can go in and measure their levels of happiness on a day-to-day basis, or write down 3 words that reflect how you're feeling today, or tracking somebody. So projects working with young people, doing trackers around, so what's happening now at home, what's happening at school, what's happening with your ideas about furthering education, what's happening with your friendship groups. So you measure lots of different data points to see what's showing up. Some of the people that have done these projects are kind of data analyst minded people, and you see that they measure lots of stuff, but at the end of the day, what they're measuring, do people feel better having gone through this project? Is there a sense of calm, a sense of relief, or a sense of joy that's being created through this?
And when we look at the qualitative side of it, so the stories, in a sense, let's just call it the stories of change. I wonder what impact that has on sustaining the community. So for instance, we talked earlier about you have the community of coaches, the community of users, the community of the support community, potentially a funding community. And I wonder what those stories do versus data.
Yeah, so you got to have both data points. You got to have the kind of the numbers of it, but you got to have the story parts to it, because they're the things that make people go, I want to continue working on this. I think it was the Support Haven group that did this, where they would gather on a weekly basis to share the stories of change and of impact that they had noticed.
Oh, that's nice.
And so they were collecting stories as they were moving through the project. And so when people were feeling down, they would go, yeah, this was, this has been a struggle and people haven't been showing up. And somebody goes, yeah, I get that. But I was talking to Johnny and saying, how was this for you? And Johnny shared that he's now doing this, and this is happening in his family, and this is happening in his world. And people go, great, we can see the impact that we're making. Let's continue with that.
That's really nice. And instead of it being like a testimonial after the event, it's more like a sort of a spiritual transfusion as you go, keeping your energy up.
Yeah,
I love that. That's a really.
I remember way back when we were doing the project with the with that group, and lots of people weren't turning up, and it was all a bit of a nightmare. And we were like, oh, should we just pull the plug? And a couple of people said, yeah, we could pull the plug, but I've got this young woman coming, and this is what she's saying about what's happening and how she's
Mm,
using her learning and her understanding. And then we go, oh,
yeah.
okay, it may not be working for everybody, but for those it's working. So how do we help her continue it? And in hindsight, we could have gone, okay, so how do we find more of her to work with
Mm.
to create the changes, as opposed to trying to work with everybody that was on the program?
Yeah, that brings up two thoughts for me. One is it reminds me of the analogy of the starfish on the beach, where there's thousands of starfish and you throw one back in and all that stuff. But the second thing it makes me think about is what needs to happen in the mind of, I'm going to keep calling it the catalyst because for some reason that's the thought of my mind, is that the person that creates this is a catalyst. What needs to happen in the mind of the catalyst in terms of um, being able to think at that level of detail? Like you and I didn't think that back then. Well,
Mm,
primarily I didn't think that back then. It was my project and I failed abysmally with it at that point. But looking back now, I think, oh yeah, it's true. If I had the structure of thinking that would have helped me go, this is how to get more of her. I'm just wondering what has to be in place, do you think, to maintain that?
so I think part of this is the team, because the team around you help you go, have you thought about this? Have you looked at that? And it doesn't need to be a team of coaches. Recently, I've joined the board of a theatre company, and we were sitting well, we weren't sitting together, but we were on a Zoom meeting talking about their latest project, and a lot of it was about funding during the pandemic and issues and challenges. And I was like, this is what you need, right? Because there's a finance person, there's a legal person, there's an education person, there's a designer, there's just their old drama teacher, and then they've got me on this, and partly because of my theatre and education background, I'm on it. But a lot of the stuff that I was bringing was the stuff that we do here at Animas. I was going, oh, okay, you're doing that. Have you thought about this? And okay, maybe you need to get this out there first. And who's in the community that does this kind of work that you can connect with to make this happen? And so by having that group of people around you that can ask you different questions to get you to get out of the stuckness, because I think the level of detail is only achieved when you're able to step back and look at it as a big picture, as opposed to being caught up in the detail of it in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's kind of feels like a lesson from the old days when I have this conversation with you and I look back to that first project we did all those years ago, and I think, my goodness, in some ways I kind of look at that it was kind of like an ego sense of, it wasn't really ego, but at the same time it felt like I had to make it happen. And I think what I'm taking from this conversation is the importance of knowing from day one, really, that your concept of communities of impact rather than person of impact
Mm.
is really where the heart of this all lies.
Yeah, because in that, as soon as the eye starts to get tired, there is nothing else around it.
Right.
But when there is the community and a member in the community gets tired, everybody else steps in and goes, how can we
Mm,
help you? What
yeah.
do you need from us?
Yeah. One of the things you've mentioned a few times through this conversation, we haven't yet picked up on it, but it's the funding issue. And I'm just curious on
Mm.
your view on this. I was speaking to somebody yesterday and I said, my sort of typical approach is, as an entrepreneur, is what resources do I have I can utilize? But at the same time, I can imagine that if you do get funding, it's an incredibly life-giving process to your work you're trying to do. What's your take on this? Get funding, don't get funding. How do you get funding? How do you manage it, etc.?
So what's really interesting, when I ran a theatre company, we didn't get funding. We get small project funding, but we were like, we don't want to be an externally funded program, because the moment that funding goes away, we fall apart. So we were very keen on creating the funds ourselves to manage the program, because there's sustainability in that. Um, I I don't think you should look at your project and go, right, how do I get funding to make this project work? I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think with a social impact project, you need to go, what can I do and who can I rally around me to make this work? And whilst you're doing that, you can then go, but what's around that might support us? what funding pockets might exist that whilst we're running can buy us a new computer, can pay for us to have a space for a day so we can get everybody together to celebrate or to have a conversation, or will pay for some materials that we can then produce. So it's not getting funding to do the program, it's doing the program and then having a keen eye, or finding somebody with that keen eye that can look outside and go, what else is going on in the world that might throw some cash our way or some support our way to enable us to do what we're doing, but on a bigger scale or with more quality or more comfort.
Yeah. I really like that, because as you know, I used to do social policy conferences years ago, and there'd often be the kind of projects that were funded, and then as soon as the funding went away, or the alternative was the champion of that project went away, it would collapse. There was no system-wide sustainability, and I think that word sustainability feels very important to this.
And in the work that I've done in sort of my previous life, it was as soon as the government changes, all the funding policies change, and
Right.
then you're stuck.
Yes.
And so it's like you want the work to exist in and of itself, in order to move forward. And part of that capturing that data enables you to get funding, because funders are going to want to know, so who's this impacting, how many people, where are they? That's the kind of information that they want. And often corporates will give out pockets of money to fund programs, but they want to know where that money's going. So that's part of the other reason to keep that data.
Yeah. We're just coming towards the end of our conversation, Rob, and I'm curious if somebody's been watching this and they're like, I'd love to do something, but it kind of sounds a little bit complicated. And do I need to be planning all this stuff, and it's systemic this and funding that? And what's your advice for somebody who's just, they feel like there's an urge in them, and they like this idea of communities of impact? What's your advice to them?
So my advice would be, talk to the people around you to see who else has that urge. Because if you can find 3 people, then that's the beginning of something moving forward. And then it's that, that idea of, you find 3, then they find 3, then somebody else finds 3, and all of a sudden you're building this into a space. I think there's something about sharing your vision out into the world so others can see it and then choose to be part of what you're doing. And starting small, start small and build it. Some of these programs that we've interviewed over the last day, some of them are doing huge, massive numbers, working with hundreds and hundreds of people, and that's amazing. But they often started with 1 or 2 conversations with the idea to help 1 or 2 people, and then that's grown and grown and grown. So start small, communicate with people around you, and test it, test things out, see how it works, test it, build it, grow it.
Yeah, great advice. And as we close off now, I'm just curious, you've done various interviews, as I have, for this summit, and no doubt taken lots of ideas and inspiration from it. I'm curious, what would you like to kind of share to sum up the whole of this conference in terms of the conversations you've had, and how it's left you feeling, and what you'd love to see for the future?
So I guess one of the biggest feelings for me is just inspired, just that the idea that somebody can go, I want to help X, and just go about making it happen, connect with people, and then grow it. And because it's their passion and their desire, they don't fall at the first hurdle. So that it's really inspiring to see that happening. And I think what I would like to see in the future is people taking the risk to make these things happen, and having the idea and following it up. Because one of the fallouts of these conversations is you talk to people and they go, oh yeah, I thought about doing something like that. And it's like, well, if you think about it, talk to some people and make it happen, see what you can do. So don't just have the idea, but turn the idea into something. And I guess this is just coming to me right now. It's like, it would be great to have an incubator for this, sort of a social impact incubator where people go, I want to do a social impact project around this, so they could go somewhere and we could go, okay, what do you need to think about? Who might you need to connect with? And help them to do the incubation, and then go, right, now you've got those ideas, you can move forward and make that happen.
That's really nice. So you've finished off with a whole new thread for us to follow over the coming months once we've got our social impact manager. Robert, it's been really great talking to you about this. It's been a real pleasure. And I think it's been an amazing process to interview these guys, to see the work they're doing. So thanks for being part of it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you as always.